everybody! Welcome to Mental Health Yourself. Yes, we officially have a name for our lives. Welcome to the first video that we are doing for Rise Again, which is my mental health page. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for being a part of this journey, and really appreciate the support that I've been getting for several months and for the past years while I was in my program. So I just want to say thank you for everyone for that. So tonight we are going to be doing the emotional abusive mother. So why did I pick this topic? Most of you know that I pick my topics when I see items coming up in therapy and when I'm seeing a lot of other things that I'm hearing. And so this is a topic that has definitely been coming up with my clients. I have persons in therapy who you can clearly see that to some degree the mother's role affected them, and the mother's style of parenting affected them. And so hopefully we'll be able to understand a little bit more as to why does this happen. I want to start off by saying that we're going to talk about emotionally abusive mothers, but at the same time we have to think about it this way. Before you're a mother, you're a partner, you're a friend, you're a daughter. And so most of these women have been able to, for what I like to say, for lack of a better word, practice. And they practice a lot of these skills that we'll talk about on their partners. They use these tactics and skills on their families before they have their own. And as well as they're going to also have been exposed to these tactics as a daughter that would have possibly have had the same treatment done to them by their mothers themselves. I don't really truly believe that you wake up one day and you're abusive. And the thing is, what's really scary is that we don't consider a lot of these behaviors to be abusive. And so that is why bringing about awareness is really important. So let's just get into it. So what is emotional abuse? What is emotional abuse? And why are we honing in on emotionally abusive women? Well, it's really important. Emotional abusive behaviors is when there is usually an assertion of power or control through verbal and really mind games, for lack of better words. So these mind games can be as insignificant as not listening when your children says, you ask a kid, are you hungry? And the kid says no, but you still plate their food anyway. Some of these mind games can be dismissing your child's achievements. It can be smothering your child one day and not completely ignoring them the next week. So there are numerous things that we have to consider. So these are just some of the things that abusive mothers do. So frightening. So abusive mother will frighten you. And the problem is, again, because we use corporal punishment so much with our children, the tactic of scaring or threatening or physically beating our children have become so common. So you may not really beat your children, but you'll threaten them to say, I'm gonna give you licks if you don't do this or you don't do that, or you made me have to do this because you couldn't listen. And so those threats and scare tactics are used to control the behavior of the child. We also have, I mentioned, neglect. So this is really common. I think this is also because at least in Guyana and the Caribbean, we consider mothering to be making sure our children eat and go to sleep on time and their homework is done and they have shelter and a uniform. So we're not considering the neglect that we give to our children. So when our children need someone to speak to, when our children are having a bad day at school, these are all forms of important things that happen to our children, but we're not considering how we end up neglecting their emotional needs and their psychological needs by just being distant and neglecting. And again, that can be something that they picked up from their own parents or their own family. Maybe they just didn't talk about their emotions in their family, and so that kind of being comfortable with talking about your emotions with your family is not there. Right. So, punishing. So this again comes back to um, excessive corporal punishment. And I always tell people there's a fine line between like abuse, physical abuse, and corporal punishment again, because we don't see that line. We don't see that this is wrong. We don't see that there's a fine difference between your child doing something wrong and you taking a moment to collect yourself and then meting out the punishment and telling them, I'm I'm going to give you these spanks, or I'm going to do this because you did that, and explaining to them why it's wrong. So what we do is, instead of being critical about it, to help our child understand what they did was wrong, we just beat them. And we beat them also with our own rage and anger and embarrassment and disappointment built in. So we're not able to detach the same way if we were thinking with a logical mind, okay, 3 slaps on the butt for breaking that vase. We're going to be reactive, and we're just going to keep hitting and hitting and hitting. So punishment is also a form of emotional abuse, on top of course, the physical abuse, because we actually end up getting so scared of our parents that we start to detach from them. And that can be really tragic and really challenging for you to say that you had a great relationship with your mother, and now you no longer have it because you're totally disconnected from them because they beat you so badly as a child. So ignoring, we already spoke about this. Ignoring your children is something, and the thing is, we're in this day and age where we're on our phones all the time, and so ignoring our children is something that's so easy to do, but we don't realize how negative it is for our children. But it can be really, really an easy thing that we do. So when a whole conversation is happening, we don't hear when our child is trying to speak. We also come from a culture where we have said to our children, don't speak until you're spoken to. So you have a whole group of grown-ups talking and no one's listening to the child. And then we also see whereby we have this other saying, which is, don't get into big people's story. And so you have a child who might want to say something or ask a question, a genuine question, and they're not able to verbalize that because you are physically and emotionally and psychologically ignoring the presence of that child. So on the other side of the spectrum, apart from ignoring and neglecting and abusing, you get what I call helicopter parents. So the helicopter parents is the parents that want to do everything. They want to smother you. They want to make sure you everything is done for you, and they basically render you helpless. So you're like 15 and you can't even pick your own clothes to go to a party, and that sense of control is so challenging for the upcoming person youth who's trying to get a sense of identity, a sense of autonomy from the time a child is 2. They're attempting to test your boundaries. They're attempting to get their own sense of autonomy. And so for you to be doing these things for your children, you're not granting your child the access to that autonomy. And so things like their self-identity is corrupted. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well, because there's different forms of attachments that I want to talk about as well. So again, we see a lot of dismissing. So you're not just ignoring, you're not just neglecting, but you're also dismissing. And when you dismiss your child, you create a sense of doubt. So if you were to say to your child, I'm not feeling good, or something happened at school, but you dismiss them, they start to question whether there's any validity in their emotions or any validity in an incident. And so they completely feel unsupported or unheard. And the problem is that when children start to seek out persons who listen to them, they get placed in a very compromising position where they might be in a very toxic or unhealthy relationship later on in life, because they're still seeking out that validation. They're still trying to see if, was my thoughts irrational? Was my concerns or my emotions or something, how I felt about something, real? So being dismissive is very, very, very traumatizing. It leaves a child with so much self-doubt. Lots and lots of self-doubt you see with persons who are dismissed as children. Unavailable. Now, unavailable really peeves me, because when you are unavailable for your child, but you grant love and attention for other people's children, it is really damaging for that child, because then they start to internalize, well, mommy clearly likes children because she spends time with someone else's kids, or she goes and visits someone else's kids, or she plays with someone else's kids, but mommy doesn't play with me, or mommy doesn't talk to me, or mommy doesn't coo over me because I'm not an infant anymore, I'm not a baby anymore. And you see that a lot of times. People mistreat their own children, but they're very happy to pick up and play and babysit for other people's kids. And I've seen that, and it's really disrespectful, and it's very damaging for that child, because they're constantly going to be asking themselves, why did my mother never love me? Why did my mother never pick me up? Why did my mother never hug me? But she's okay with hugging other people's children. So being unavailable is really, really detrimental. So another style, what you see, is the parents who are like enmeshed, what they call enmeshed, so like stage mothers. So everything looks perfect on the outside, but they're really, really abusive in the home. They want to be a part of everything you do. They're going to be there at your dance recitals. They're going to be there at your sports day. They're going to do that, things that will show that they're a good mother. But in reality, they're dismissive at home. They ignore you. They're unavailable. And so that is a really sad thing, because you're not really able to get help, because you as a kid going and saying, or years later in therapy and saying, like, everyone thought we were perfect, but my mother was horrible behind closed doors. And so that's really, really challenging, because because all of your achievements becomes your mother's achievements. And it's kind of similar to a narcissistic mother as well, whereby you are their trophy, and what your accomplishments are is a reflection of them and has nothing to do with you. You're just a pawn in them trying to fill in their holes and making them feel validated. Like, oh, look how much time I put into my child and how much money I've spent on making sure my child was great at piano and stuff like that. There's, of course, the self-involved. So those are similar to narcissists. So everything is about them. They're also trying to get validation themselves. They're also broken women as well. And so they're trying to get all the attention and validation they didn't get as a child, and then now they're a mother, and they're using their child as a pawn. Role reversal. So this is a really tricky one. Well, not really tricky in the sense that we see it so much in Guyana, whereby the mother is incapable of doing their job, really, in the sense of, like, they can't parent, they can't cook, they can't take care of the child. And a lot of times we see role reversal in parents with their own mental health disorders. So if you're severely depressed, if you have schizophrenia, so a lot of times people have mental health conditions themselves, and they're not able to function, or they're an alcoholic, and so they're not able to take care of the child. So the child becomes what we call a parentified child. And this parentified child is the one who is taking care of their younger siblings. They're getting their siblings in bed. They're the ones waking them up. Sometimes you have like 12-year-olds cooking full-fledged breakfast and lunch for their siblings. You also see, and I saw this in Barbados when it was my internship, that the 9-year-old older sister, the eldest child, is also meting out punishment as well. Whereby, because they in their mind believe that they're the parent, they've been made to feel like the parent for like 3-4 years, so they truly believe that they are the parent. And the thing is that's really tragic about this is that the parent is okay with that behavior, and they also lean a lot on that child. So you would see like someone, like a mother, coming and telling her 14-year-old daughter, your father does cheat upon me, your father does do this, and looking to the child for support as if they're an adult, but you have a 13-14-year-old person who has really no clue on how to function at this age, other than cook, clean, and do what's kind of like obvious of them, but they have no emotional capacity to support their parent. Nor is it appropriate for your 14-year-old to support you through marital issues or any other issues like that. And then the last is combative. So combative parents are the parents who you cannot tell anything about their children. They are right, they're never wrong. They don't even acknowledge that their behavior is abuse. They are ready to go to war with people. They're ready to go to war with their children. They are abusive. They're verbally abusive. They insult the children. They are ready to like bite. they really don't care about the ramifications, and these are really like the really bad mothers. And so it's just very tragic if you're in a combative environment. That child grows up with so much trauma. They can't trust the mother, they can't trust they're unreliable. That's another form as well. If you're unreliable, like one day you're great with your mom, the next day you're not. And so that kind of tension in that home can be very anxiety provoking. And then the child is a grown person, come to see a therapist, and you have so much anxiety. They're highly critical, they're very defensive, and they're ready and okay with putting down their child even in public. And sometimes they may hide it in public, like kind of like the self-involved, the narcissist mother, but they're very combative. Right. So let's move on to what happens as a result now in adulthood. So there are different types of attachments, which I'll talk about just now, but what we usually see is the 4 types of attachments that we often see is a secure attachment. First off the bat, a secure attachment. We were as a baby, we were taken care of. When we cried, our mothers held us. When we were scared, we were comforted. So we have a secure attachment. We were not given too much attention, like we weren't smothered. We were able to like spend time with an aunt, a grandparent. It's very normal, it's natural. The child doesn't cry excessively when the mother returns. He is comfortable with slowly going in and hugging her and stuff like that. So it's a secure attachment. He's not fearful that she's never coming back, and he's not so disconnected that he doesn't care when she returns. So that's the first one. Second one is the unhealthy attachments, which is anxious-avoidant. So as a result, in adulthood, what we see is this person swings between like clingy and then outright hostile. So what has happened is the child is not given the attention that they need, and the parent, as a result, they can't depend on the parent, and they don't understand. They're too young to understand why the parent does that. So they start to kind of distance themselves from the child, from the mother, and so they become anxious when she's gone, and when she returns, they're avoidant. So they don't really know how to be as adults, in the sense of they don't know how to deal with emotions, they don't know how to deal with love, they don't even know how to deal with attention, because they were not giving those things. So they're either going to be super clingy because they've been waiting their whole life for someone to give them this attention, while at the same time, if they're avoidant, they're easy to walk away from relationships, they're cold, they can get very hostile sometimes because it's like overwhelming emotion. So that's really kind of a tricky one. When we often see anxious-ambivalent, and so these are mothers who send mixed signals. So good one day, not so good one day. You don't know who's showing up to the gunfight. You don't know if it's good mommy or a bad mommy. And as a result of that, the child is very passive-aggressive and insecure, because here one day they're being vulnerable and they get a good response. Another day they're being vulnerable and they get a bad response. So they're very like passive-aggressive. So they're not sure how to ask for things because they're not sure what response they're going to get. And that's what I always tell people, passive-aggressive people. Passive-aggressive persons are silent but deadly, in the sense of like they will try and ask for something but not do it directly, because God forbid they ask them directly and you get a no, that really is hurtful. And so so many times, because they haven't had a consistent response from their mother, they get very passive-aggressive, they get very insecure, they're not sure how to express themselves, because the attention just wasn't given on a consistent basis for them to be like, yes, I am secure in this relationship. Good. So the other and the last is disorganized, disoriented. So you see, this is what exactly it sounds like. The mother is either smothering you all the time or super aggressive on the other times. And so this can lead to really serious mental health disorders. So you can be depressed, you develop depression, you also sometimes end up being violent, and then sometimes if you're not violent, you're passive. So it's because these are on 2 spectrums of emotions. So smothering you all the time, giving you no sense of identity, no sense of control, your whole life was done the way your mother wanted it to be done, and then aggressive, so you have to walk on eggshells all the time. You've learned to be violent. You've learned that violence gets you away and manipulation gets you one way. So you're either going to develop like depression or violence. You're going to be passive, also be super passive because you're not sure of the response you're going to get. So you're like never sure how to interact. These persons often, like I said, I talk about manipulation. They also don't know boundaries, and they also really good at manipulation because they've learned that if you smother a child or if you're aggressive, you're going to get your way. And as well as they oftentimes are hypersensitive, so they're easily pissed off. They easily fall off the handles because one thing can be, multiple things can be triggers. So imagine if you just had an aggressive mother, then you would be triggered by aggression. You would either like hate aggression and hate conflict, or like be in it, like just fester in it. But because you're also being smothered, you're also triggered by people who are overly affectionate, people who may seem trusting, and so you're constantly like hypersensitive, hypervigilant, constantly worrying about whether someone's intentions is good. Are they going to become aggressive the next day? Are they going to become violent the next day? And so it's really just a lot going on. So I'm going to specify just shortly in closing, really, what we see in persons with the anxious-ambivalent. So this is like good one day, mixed signals, is they lack a sense of strong identity. Why? Because they were not granted the validation that they need on a consistent basis. What people need to understand is you need to be consistent with children. Children build up routines in their head. And so if you're like ambivalent, you're gonna send mixed signals all the time. So they're like, do I have validation today? Do I not have validation today? And this uncertainty of validation leaves them feeling like, well, am I good at dance? I don't know. My mother's never complimented me. Am I good at speaking? Am I good at math? And so you constantly are looking for this validation to build up your sense of identity, because if we're not told what we're good at, then we really don't know if we're good at it. Sometimes we get validation from other people, but a lot of times because we rely so much on this mother-child relationship that if we're not given it, that is broken, right? And so we don't have a sense of trust in ourselves. Now, anxious-avoidant. So again, the child is anxious when they're gone and avoidant when the mother returns. They don't trust people. They just don't. They just don't have this sense that you're gonna, especially if you're abandoned as a baby or as a child, that sense of abandonment carries with persons all the time. And so that's what people don't realize. And a lot of my clients do have some level of abandonment, and they also have emotional abandonment, which means that their parents ignored them, dismissed them, neglected them, and so they really don't have a sense of, I can trust these people. If my mother abandoned me emotionally, what would make anyone else want to love me, trust me, take care of me? Because the one person who was supposed to do it didn't do it. And so they don't trust people, and because they don't have a strong sense of identity and stuff like that as well, all these kinds of things plays into their personality and their behavior with other people. Now, disorganized, you see persons who are like overly loving and forgiving. So this disoriented and disorganized. So because the mother is like smothering you and then aggressive, you tend to be very forgiving because you know that that love is coming at the end of that blowout. So these are the persons that you see in abusive situations because they have learned that love and aggression can go together. And so because of that, they're overly clingy, they're overly loving, they're very forgiving, they'll be okay with a fight tomorrow, but then they're like, because in their head it's been wired that I know my mom would hit me, but then she spends the entire week taking care of me and hugging me up and reading me bedtime stories. But you know that pending potential argument, blowout, combative behavior is coming. So you've joined those two in your mind, and so that becomes normative. The other side of the disoriented, disorganized is you can be really cold and manipulative. So you realize that if I'm aggressive, but then I'm loving the day after, and I create a honeymoon phase for my partner, I can get them to do what I want them to do. And because they never really knew genuine love, they just knew either aggression or smothering. They just kind of are easy to just flee a lot of times. A lot of persons are cold, emotionally cold and disconnected, because they often, people complain, my clients complain, why is it that I flee in relationships? Because a lot of times when we're under stress and we're in a traumatic incident, freeze, flee, or fight becomes our natural instincts. And you flee so much, so you run away from home, you walk out of an argument, you you leave, you hang up the phone. You get so used to doing that and seeing that as children that it becomes natural for you to flee. And when you flee, you're interpreted as being cold, emotionally disconnected. So you're either going to be super manipulative or cold. Again, anxious-avoidant, you see that persons are really like childlike and immature. Like I have clients who are like, why is he or she so immature for their age, though 30, 34, 37, because they're still stuck in that phase of wanting the validation but being scared. They're anxious that you'll leave them, but when you're around, they don't really care for you. And you see that a lot in relationships. And that childlike behavior is the ability to like want this love and attention, and they're immature because they haven't really developed in certain things, emotional intelligence, that kind of stuff. A lot of people don't understand that. What happens to children when they're developing, and I feel like I'm becoming a developmental psychologist now, is that it has such lasting impacts in adulthood. And we never really think about it until you're sitting down with like me, and I'm just talking like, well, tell me about your childhood, tell me about your family, like, how did we get here? We had to have gone here some way. And then voila, you realize abusive mothers, and has really did a number on them. So yeah. And then the last one, again, disorganized and disoriented. They are hard at controlling their emotion because they are looking for this validation, they're looking for this attention, and so they're gonna have like frequent moments of being upset and angry and not knowing what to do with it, because when they're a baby and they cried, their mother didn't come. And they start to, we are hardwired through evolution to associate child and mother, and when I cry, I should be attended to. So the more and more a mother does not respond to her child, the more the child becomes anxious, and the more and more you don't return to them when they cry, or you leave, or you come in the house and you left your child with your mother, the child becomes avoidant because he is no longer depending on you to feel good about themselves. They're no longer depending on you to soothe them. So they have not received that kind of attention, and now you see them as grown-ups and they're having a temper tantrum because they did not know how to soothe themselves when they got upset. So these are just some things, and I feel like I'm always watching my time, and I'm always aware that like I can't cram everything into like 20 minutes, and I always feel so bad. And I just really wish that persons would help me out, tell me how to do these things, kind of thing, because I really want to be able to make these videos something that you guys can listen to on a regular basis. But I really appreciate those who tuned in, and thank you for being a part of the first live on the page. This will be going onto my actual Facebook and onto YouTube later, so thank you again for attending and tuning in. I hope that some of this information will make sense for persons who've been abused, or who are now seeing these characteristics in their partners. And by all means, if they need therapy, I can be found at SASOD. I can be found from next week or two. I'll be at GRPA, and in January I will be with Woodlands. So by all means, Facebook me, message me, and I can come to you. So thank you all, and have a good night.